The exploration vessel Endeavour drifted silently through the dark void near the Tau Ceti system. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge watching the stars through the main viewport. Her crew had been mapping this region of space for 3 months. Now, and they had found nothing but empty space and dead rocks. The mission was routine but important for expanding human knowledge of their local stellar neighborhood. The ship's sensors suddenly detected something unusual. A massive object appeared on their screens floating in the darkness between 2 small asteroids. The object was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was crystalline in structure and seemed to pulse with a faint blue light that came from deep within its core. Dr. Alan Reed, the ship's xenorchaeologist, was called to the bridge immediately. He had spent his entire career studying the few alien artifacts that humans had discovered over the decades. Most of them were simple tools, or fragments of unknown materials, but this was different. This was clearly artificial and far more complex than anything humanity had ever created. The captain ordered the ship to move closer to the mysterious object. As they approached, it became clear that the structure was enormous. It measured nearly 2 kilometers in length and was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The patterns resembled circuit boards but were made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with energy. Dr. Reed suggested they attempt to scan the object with their most advanced equipment. The scans revealed something incredible. The structure was not just a solid object, but was actually a sophisticated piece of technology. It contained quantum processors and energy conduits that were far beyond human understanding. The technology was so advanced that their computers could barely analyze its basic functions. The crew spent several days studying the object from a safe distance. They discovered that it was some kind of communication device or relay station. The crystal structure contained vast amounts of data and seemed to be connected to a network that stretched across the galaxy. However, the device appeared to be dormant and had been silent for thousands of years. During their investigation, a young technician named Pete Williams accidentally activated one of the ship's experimental quantum scanners while it was pointed at the artifact. The scanner sent out a pulse of energy that somehow interacted with the crystal structure. Suddenly, the entire object began to glow brightly, and the patterns on its surface started moving rapidly. The activation triggered something that nobody expected. The communication relay came online and began receiving signals from across the galaxy. The ship's communication systems were flooded with transmissions in languages that no human had ever heard before. The signals were coming from dozens of different sources scattered throughout the galaxy. Dr. Reed worked frantically to decode the incoming messages. He discovered that the signals were not random, but were part of an organized communication network. The messages contained references to trade routes, political negotiations, and military movements. It became clear that these were communications between different alien civilizations that were part of some larger organization. As the hours passed, the crew began to understand the true significance of their discovery. They had found evidence of a galactic civilization that had been operating for thousands of years. The messages indicated that there were at least 12 different alien species that were part of something called the Galactic Consortium. This organization controlled trade, politics, and military affairs across vast regions of the galaxy. The most shocking revelation came when Dr. Reed decoded a set of star charts that were included in the transmissions. These charts showed the territory controlled by the Galactic Consortium, and Earth's solar system was clearly marked within their borders. However, there was something strange about how Earth was labeled on the charts. It was marked as a restricted zone with the notation "Primitive Species Under Quarantine." Captain Santos realized the implications immediately. Humanity was not alone in the galaxy, but they had been deliberately isolated by advanced alien civilizations. The Galactic Consortium knew about Earth and had been watching humanity develop, but had decided that humans were too primitive to be contacted or allowed to join their galactic community. The crew spent the next several days monitoring the communications and learning more about the galactic civilization. They discovered that the consortium had strict rules about which species could join their organization. Only civilizations that had achieved certain technological milestones were considered worthy of membership. Species that failed to meet these standards were either ignored or actively prevented from expanding beyond their home systems. The messages also revealed that the consortium had a complex hierarchy. Some species held positions of power and influence, while others were relegated to serving roles. The military was dominated by a warrior species called the Drachneri, while scientific research was controlled by the Xanthari. Trade and commerce were managed by the Voidians, and several other species filled various specialized roles within the galactic government. As the crew processed this information, they began to understand their position in the galaxy. Humanity was considered a young and primitive species that would need centuries more development before they could even be considered for membership in the Galactic Consortium. The alien civilizations had been watching Earth and had determined that humans were not ready for contact with galactic society. This revelation sparked intense debate among the crew. Some argued that they should maintain silence and continue studying the communications to learn more about the galactic civilization. Others felt that humanity deserved to know about their place in the galaxy and should attempt to make contact with the consortium. Captain Santos faced the most difficult decision of her career. The discovery of the galactic civilization would change everything for humanity. If they remained silent, they could continue to study the alien communications and slowly prepare for eventual contact. However, if they announced their presence, they would be forcing a confrontation with civilizations that were far more advanced than Earth. After consulting with her senior officers, Captain Santos made her choice. She believed that humanity deserved to know the truth about their place in the galaxy. The crew worked together to compose a message that would be broadcast through the ancient relay network. The message was simple but profound, announcing that humanity was aware of the Galactic Consortium and requesting formal contact. Dr. Reed activated the transmission system and sent the message into the Galactic Communication Network. The signal traveled through the crystal relay and was broadcast to every member of the consortium. For the first time in human history, Earth had announced its presence to the galaxy. The crew of the Endeavour waited anxiously for a response. They had no idea what reaction their message would provoke, or how the advanced alien civilizations would respond to humanity's unexpected announcement. The only certainty was that their discovery had changed everything and there was no going back to the time when humanity believed they were alone in the universe. 3 months passed after the message was sent through the ancient relay network. Earth's governments were in chaos as news of the galactic civilization spread across the planet. President Amanda Torres had assembled a team of the world's best diplomats, scientists, and military leaders to prepare for whatever response might come from the consortium. The response arrived on a Tuesday morning when massive ships appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. The vessels were unlike anything humans had ever imagined. They were sleek and organic, looking as if they had been grown rather than built. The largest ship was over 5 kilometers long and seemed to shimmer with an energy field that bent light around its hull. Admiral Robert Kim, commander of Earth's combined space fleet, ordered all human ships to maintain a respectful distance. The alien vessels had demonstrated technology that was clearly superior to anything humanity possessed. Their arrival alone had been accomplished without any detectable energy signatures or disturbances in space-time. A communication signal was received by Earth's communication networks 3 hours after the ships arrived. The message was transmitted in perfect English, which surprised everyone since humans had never shared their language with alien civilizations. The message was simple and direct, requesting permission to establish a diplomatic meeting in Earth's orbit. President Torres agreed to the meeting and preparations began immediately. The largest space station in Earth's orbit was cleared and prepared to receive the alien delegation. Security measures were implemented, but everyone understood that if the aliens wanted to harm humanity, there was very little that Earth's defenses could do to stop them. The meeting took place aboard the space station, with President Torres leading the human delegation. She was accompanied by Admiral Kim and Dr. Nina Volkov, the planet's leading expert on theoretical physics. The human representatives waited nervously as the alien shuttle approached the station. The alien delegation was led by Ambassador Kithara, who appeared to be from a species called the Altarians. She was tall and elegant with features that seemed almost human but with subtle differences that marked her as clearly alien. Her skin had a slight blue tint, and her eyes were larger than human eyes with silver irises that seemed to reflect light. In unusual ways, Ambassador Kithara spoke to the human delegation, with a voice that was melodious but carried an undertone of authority. She explained that the Galactic Consortium had been aware of humanity for several centuries and had been monitoring their development. The decision to maintain the quarantine around Earth had been made after careful consideration of humanity's technological and social progress. The ambassador's words were polite, but the message was clear. Humanity was considered primitive by galactic standards. Their technology was approximately 800 years behind the current galactic norm. Their faster-than-light travel was crude and inefficient. Their energy systems were wasteful, and their manufacturing processes were decades behind even the most basic consortium standards. More troubling was the assessment of human society. The consortium had observed that humanity was still divided into competing nation-states that engaged in warfare and conflict. This was seen as a sign of immaturity since all advanced civilizations had moved beyond such primitive social structures thousands of years ago. Ambassador Kithara explained that the consortium had established specific criteria for membership. Species must demonstrate technological advancement, social stability, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. Humanity currently met none of these requirements and would need several more centuries of development before they could be considered for membership. However, the ambassador acknowledged that humanity's unexpected contact through the relay network had created a unique situation. The consortium could not simply ignore Earth's message and return to the previous quarantine policy. They were prepared to offer humanity a different arrangement that would allow limited participation in galactic society. The offer was for client species status. This would allow humanity to establish colonies on designated worlds and participate in basic galactic commerce. Humans would be provided with fundamental technologies that would improve their quality of life and allow them to contribute to the galactic economy in limited ways. The terms of the client arrangement were strict and clearly defined. Humanity would be assigned to specific roles within the galactic economy. They would be responsible for mining operations on resource-rich worlds, agricultural production on fertile planets, and basic manufacturing of simple goods. These were the roles typically assigned to younger species, who had not yet developed the sophistication required for more advanced work. Military affairs would remain under the control of the Drachnari, who had evolved as a warrior species and had managed galactic defense for thousands of years. Scientific research would continue to be dominated by the Zentari, whose mathematical and analytical abilities far exceeded anything humanity could offer. Trade and commerce would be managed by the Vordians, who had developed economic systems that were perfectly suited to galactic-scale operations. Dr. Volkov asked several questions about the technological restrictions that would be placed on humanity. The ambassador explained that certain advanced technologies would not be shared with client species for safety reasons. Weapons technology was strictly controlled to prevent conflicts between species. Advanced manufacturing techniques were limited to prevent economic disruption. Most importantly, faster-than-light communication systems were restricted to prevent client species from interfering with consortium operations. The human delegation requested time to consider the offer and consult with their governments. Ambassador Kithara agreed to wait for a response but made it clear that the offer was not negotiable. Humanity could accept client status or return to isolation until they naturally developed the required technological sophistication, which was estimated to take approximately 1,000 years. President Torres returned to Earth to discuss the offer with world leaders. The debate was intense and emotional. Some argued that accepting client status was accepting permanent inferiority and that humanity should reject the offer and continue developing independently. Others pointed out that the technological benefits of joining the galactic community, even in a limited role, would advance human civilization by centuries. The deciding factor was the realization that isolation was no longer truly possible. The consortium knew about Earth and would continue to monitor human development. If humanity rejected the offer, they would remain trapped in their solar system while advanced civilizations controlled the galaxy around them. After 2 weeks of debate, the world's governments reached a consensus. They would accept client species status as a stepping stone to eventual full membership in the Galactic Consortium. The decision was announced to the world and preparations began for humanity's entry into galactic society. The first human colonies were established within 6 months. Mining operations began on a resource-rich world designated as Kepler 438b. Agricultural colonies were founded on planets with favorable climates for earth crops. Manufacturing facilities were built on worlds with abundant raw materials and energy sources. Each colony was established under the supervision of consortium overseers who ensured that human activities remained within acceptable parameters. The overseers were generally fair but firm in their management. They provided the promised technological assistance but made it clear that humans were expected to follow consortium regulations without question. The transition to galactic society was not easy for humanity. Many humans struggled with the restrictions and the constant reminder that they were considered inferior by the advanced alien civilizations. However, the benefits were undeniable. Human colonies had access to technologies that eliminated disease, extended lifespans, and provided unprecedented quality of life. As the first year of client status came to an end, most humans had accepted their new role in galactic society. They understood that they were at the beginning of a long journey toward full membership in the consortium. The challenge would be proving that humanity could grow and develop into a civilization worthy of equal status with the galaxy's most advanced species. 5 years had passed since humanity accepted client species status within the Galactic Consortium. Life on the human colonies had settled into a routine of mining, farming, and basic manufacturing under the watchful eyes of consortium overseers. Most humans had adapted to their new reality, but some were growing restless with the limitations placed on their development on the mining world of Kepler 438b. Engineer Tom Anderson was becoming increasingly frustrated with the inefficiencies he observed in the alien technology. The consortium equipment was certainly advanced, but it seemed designed for different purposes than what humans needed. The mining machines were powerful but wasteful of energy. The processing systems were accurate but slow by human standards. Tom had been working alongside Dr. Emma Walsh, a biologist who had been assigned to study the planet's ecosystem. Together they had begun to notice patterns in how the various alien species approached problems. The Drachnari, who supervised security operations, were excellent at strategic planning but seemed inflexible when situations changed. The Zethari, who managed the technical systems, were mathematically precise but struggled with creative solutions. The human workers had developed their own informal methods for improving efficiency. They had learned to modify the alien equipment in small ways that increased productivity without violating the technical specifications. These modifications were technically within the rules, but they demonstrated a different approach to problem solving than what the consortium species typically used. Tom and Emma began to study the alien technology more systematically. They worked during their off hours in hidden locations away from the oversight of the consortium supervisors. What they discovered was remarkable. The alien technology was indeed advanced, but it was designed by minds that thought in very specific ways. Each species had developed their technology to match their particular mental strengths and limitations. The Drachnari technology was robust and reliable, but difficult to modify or adapt. The Zethari systems were mathematically elegant but required precise conditions to function properly. The Voidian commercial networks were efficient but inflexible when dealing with unexpected situations. Each species had created technology that reflected their own cognitive patterns. Humans were different. Emma's biological research had revealed that human brains were less specialized than those of the other species, where the Drachneri excelled at strategic thinking and the Zenthari dominated mathematical analysis. Humans possessed moderate abilities in all these areas. This made them less efficient at any single task but gave them a unique advantage in adaptability. Tom began experimenting with hybrid technologies that combined principles from different alien systems. He discovered that human intuition could find connections between disparate technologies that the specialized alien minds had missed. A Drachneri power system could be modified with Zenthari control circuits to create something more efficient than either species had achieved alone. The breakthrough came when Tom and Emma realized that the ancient communication relay network could be enhanced using human modifications. The network had been designed to carry simple messages between the various species, but human cognitive flexibility allowed them to see new possibilities. They discovered that the quantum channels could be modified to carry much more complex information, including technical specifications and even consciousness patterns. Working in secret, Tom and Emma began to contact other human colonies through the modified relay network. They found that similar underground movements had emerged on worlds throughout human space. On the agricultural planet New Eden, farmer Rosa Martinez had discovered that Earth crops could be genetically modified to produce yields that exceeded even the best alien agricultural systems. Rosa's team had learned to adapt Earth plants to alien soil conditions and atmospheric compositions. They had created new varieties of wheat and corn that could grow in environments that the consortium had considered unsuitable for agriculture. More importantly, they had developed crops that many alien species found more nutritious and flavorful than their traditional food sources. On the industrial world of Titan's Gate, manufacturer David Chun had revolutionized the production systems assigned to his facility. He had studied the alien manufacturing processes and identified inefficiencies that the consortium species had never recognized. By combining human industrial experience with alien materials and energy systems, he had created automated production lines that exceeded consortium efficiency standards by significant margins. David's innovations had caught the attention of some consortium overseers who were impressed by the improvements but did not understand how they had been achieved. The human approach to manufacturing was so different from established galactic practices that the alien supervisors could not replicate the improvements at their own facilities. The underground network of human innovators began to share their discoveries through the modified relay system. They developed new materials that were stronger and lighter than anything the consortium had produced. They created energy systems that were more efficient and less wasteful than the standard galactic technology. Most importantly, they began to develop technologies that could adapt and evolve rather than requiring complete replacement when conditions changed. The key to human success was their ability to think outside the established patterns that had dominated galactic civilization for thousands of years. The consortium species had reached a state of technological maturity where innovation had slowed to incremental improvements. Their specialized minds were excellent at perfecting existing systems, but struggled to envision completely new approaches. Humans brought a different perspective to galactic technology. Their cognitive flexibility allowed them to see connections and possibilities that had been invisible to the specialized alien minds. They could combine technologies from different species in ways that created entirely new capabilities. They could adapt existing systems to new purposes that their original designers had never intended. The underground movement began to attract attention from some progressive members of the consortium species. A few Altarian scientists became interested in human innovations and began to quietly support their research. Some Voidian traders recognized the commercial potential of human adaptations and began to secretly invest in human projects. Even some members of the typically rigid Drachneri military began to take notice when human modifications to their security systems proved more effective than the original designs. The human ability to adapt to changing conditions was something that the strategic-minded Drachneri had not encountered before, and they found it both fascinating and potentially valuable. However, the underground movement also faced risks. The consortium hierarchy was built on the assumption that each species had specific roles and capabilities. If humans could demonstrate superior performance in areas that were supposed to be dominated by other species, it could threaten the entire structure of galactic civilization. Tom and Emma knew that their activities were approaching a critical point. The human innovations were becoming too significant to hide indefinitely. They had developed technologies that could transform galactic civilization, but revealing them would certainly provoke a strong reaction from the consortium leadership. The decision was made to coordinate a simultaneous revelation across all human colonies. The underground network would demonstrate their innovations publicly and share their discoveries with all species in the galaxy. This would prevent the consortium from suppressing the information and would force a confrontation about humanity's role in galactic society. The plan was risky, but the human innovators believed it was necessary. They had proven that humanity was not the primitive species that the consortium had assumed. They had developed technologies that were superior to established galactic standards, and they had done it in just 5 years of limited access to alien systems. The time had come to show the galaxy that humanity was ready to claim its place as an equal member of galactic civilization. The underground network began final preparations for what they called the Silent Uprising. The name reflected their belief that humanity had been silenced by the consortium's assumptions about human capabilities, but was now ready to speak with a voice that the galaxy would be forced to hear. The Silent Uprising began at exactly midnight Galactic Standard Time, when human colonies across the galaxy simultaneously activated their modified relay networks. The enhanced communication systems that Tom Anderson and Emma Walsh had developed were used to broadcast a comprehensive package of human innovations to every world in consortium space. The broadcast included detailed technical specifications for the hybrid technologies that humans had developed, power systems that were 3 times more efficient than current galactic standards, manufacturing processes that could adapt to produce goods for any species, agricultural techniques that could transform barren worlds into fertile planets. Most shocking of all was the consciousness transfer technology that could theoretically grant immortality to any sentient being. The transmission was not sent only to consortium leadership, but was made available to every species in the galaxy, including those who had been subjugated by the current hierarchy. The message was clear and simple. Humanity was offering these technologies freely to any species that wanted them. There were no restrictions, no licensing fees, and no political conditions attached to the offer. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. On dozens of world, species that had been oppressed by the consortium for millennia suddenly had access to technologies that could free them from their overlords. The rigid hierarchy that had maintained galactic order for 50,000 years began to crumble within hours of the broadcast. The Meridian species, who had been enslaved by the Drachnari for 10,000 years, used human manufacturing technology to build weapons that could challenge their oppressors. The Kaleri, who had been forced to mine dangerous materials for the Zenthari, discovered that human power systems could extract resources safely and efficiently. The Torvan agricultural worlds that had been exploited by the Voidians found that human farming techniques could produce surplus food for their own populations. Ambassador Kithara of the Altarian Empire was among the first consortium leaders to respond to the broadcast. She contacted President Torres directly through the enhanced communication network to arrange an emergency meeting. The ambassador's message was urgent and concerned. She warned that the human broadcast had created a crisis that threatened to destroy the stability of galactic civilization. However, Kithara also revealed something that surprised the human leadership. She had been one of the progressive voices within the consortium who had argued for a more inclusive approach to younger species. She had supported the idea of accelerating human development rather than maintaining the traditional slow progression through client status. The ambassador explained that the consortium was divided in its response to the human broadcast. Progressive factions led by species like the Altarians and some Voidian commercial interests recognized the value of human innovations and wanted to negotiate a new arrangement. However, the dominant military faction controlled by the Draknari viewed the human actions as a direct threat. To galactic order, the Draknari response was swift and decisive. Fleet Admiral Corvin announced that humanity had violated the terms of their client species agreement by developing prohibited technologies. He declared that the human colonies were in rebellion against legitimate consortium authority and that military action was justified to restore order. The Draknari fleet was the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Their ships were massive and heavily armed with weapons that could destroy entire planets. They had maintained galactic peace for thousands of years through the threat of overwhelming force. No species had ever successfully challenged their military dominance, however. The Draknari had never faced an opponent like humanity. The human colonies had not developed traditional military forces, but their technological innovations had created new possibilities for defense. The adaptive systems that humans had developed could be quickly modified for military purposes. Admiral Robert Kim, who had been preparing for this possibility, began coordinating the defense of human space. He had been working with the underground network to develop military applications for their technologies. Human ships were smaller and less heavily armed than Draknari vessels, but they were faster and more maneuverable. The first engagement occurred at the mining world of Kepler 438b, where Tom Anderson and Emma Walsh had begun their research. 3. Draknari battleships emerged from hyperspace expecting to face primitive human defenses. Instead, they encountered a coordinated defense network that used modified communication relays to coordinate attacks faster than the speed of light. The human defenders had turned their mining equipment into weapons using the hybrid technologies they had developed. Asteroid processing lasers became ship-killing weapons. Cargo transports were modified into fast attack ships. Most importantly, the humans had learned to use the galaxy's own communication network against the Draknari by jamming their coordination systems. The battle was short but decisive. The Draknari ships were designed for overwhelming force against static targets, but could not adapt to the rapidly changing tactics that the humans employed. Within 6 hours, 2 of the 3 battleships had been destroyed and the third was forced to retreat. News of the human victory spread through the enhanced relay network faster than the Draknari could suppress it. Species across the galaxy realized that the seemingly invincible Draknari military could be defeated. Rebellions began to break out on worlds that had been controlled by the consortium for thousands of years. The Xanthari, who controlled scientific research, found their facilities occupied by species who had been denied access to advanced technology. The Voidians discovered that their commercial networks were being disrupted by traders who used human innovations to compete with established businesses. The carefully maintained hierarchy of galactic civilization was collapsing as species after species declared independence. Fleet Admiral Corvin responded to the crisis by ordering a full-scale war against humanity and their allies. The Draknari mobilized their entire fleet of over 10,000 warships for a campaign of total destruction. Their plan was to eliminate not just the human colonies but any species that had supported the rebellion. The Draknari war plan was based on their traditional approach of overwhelming force. They would concentrate their entire fleet and destroy human worlds one by one until the rebellion was crushed. They expected the war to last no more than a few months given their massive numerical advantage. However, the Draknari had failed to understand how completely the human innovations had changed the nature of galactic warfare. The enhanced communication systems allowed human allies to coordinate across vast distances instantly. The adaptive technologies meant that human forces could respond to Draknari tactics faster than the enemy could adjust their strategies. Most importantly, the human approach to alliance building was fundamentally different from the consortium model, where the consortium had maintained control through domination and hierarchy. Humans created unity through cooperation and mutual benefit. The alliance that formed around humanity included dozens of species with different capabilities and perspectives. The war that followed would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future structure of galactic civilization. The old order, based on rigid hierarchy and specialized roles, was being challenged by a new model based on cooperation and adaptability. The outcome would decide whether the galaxy would continue to be dominated by a few powerful species or would become a community of equals. Admiral Kim knew that the next phase of the war would be crucial. The Draknari fleet was approaching Earth itself with the intention of destroying humanity's homeworld. The final battle would test whether human innovation and alliance building could overcome the traditional advantages of military force and technological superiority. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy. Humanity had risen from silence to challenge the established order. Now they would have to prove that their new approach to galactic civilization was superior to the old ways that had dominated the galaxy for 50,000 years. The Galactic War raged for 18 months across hundreds of star systems. The conflict was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Traditional military doctrine based on massive fleets and overwhelming firepower was being challenged by human tactics that emphasized adaptation, cooperation, and rapid innovation. Admiral Robert Kim had transformed the human approach to warfare by creating the first truly integrated multi-species military force in galactic history. His fleets included ships from over 40 different species, each contributing their unique capabilities to the war effort. The Altarians provided advanced shielding technology. The Meridians contributed their knowledge of Draknari weaknesses. The Kaleri offered their expertise in asteroid mining, which proved surprisingly useful for space combat. The key to human success was their ability to unite species that had been enemies for millennia. The Consortium had maintained order by keeping different species separate and competing against each other. Humans created unity by finding common ground and shared interests. Species that had fought each other for thousands of years found themselves working together against their former oppressors. The turning point of the war came when humanity deployed their most significant innovation. The quantum-entangled communication arrays that Tom Anderson and Emma Walsh had developed were upgraded to provide instantaneous coordination across galactic distances. This meant that human forces could respond to Draknari movements faster than light-speed communication had ever allowed. The technology was based on the same principles that had enabled the consciousness transfer systems. Human scientists had discovered that quantum entanglement could be used to link not just particles, but entire information networks. This created a communication system that was truly instantaneous regardless of distance and could not be jammed or intercepted by enemy forces. The final battle of the war was fought at Vorthok Prime, the heavily fortified homeworld of the Draknari Empire. Fleet Admiral Corvin had withdrawn his remaining forces to defend the planet that had been the center of galactic military power for 10,000 years. The world was surrounded by orbital defense platforms, protected by energy shields, and defended by the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Admiral Kim led a coalition fleet of over 200 species to the final confrontation. The human commander had learned that victory would require more than just military success. The battle at Vorthok Prime would determine whether the galaxy would accept a new model of civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. The assault on Vorthok Prime began with a coordinated attack by ships from dozens of different species. Each group used tactics that were perfectly suited to their own capabilities, but were coordinated through the human communication network. The Altarians provided long-range support with their energy weapons. The Meridians used their speed and agility to disrupt Draknari formations. The Kaleri employed their mining expertise to break through the orbital defenses. The battle demonstrated the fundamental difference between the human approach and the traditional consortium model. The Draknari fought as individual ships following rigid tactical doctrine. The human alliance fought as a single coordinated entity that could adapt to changing conditions instantly. When the Draknari attempted to concentrate their forces, the human allies would scatter and attack from multiple directions. When the Draknari tried to spread their defenses, the human coalition would focus their attacks on weak points. The decisive moment came when the Draknari orbital defenses were finally breached. Admiral Kim led a combined force of human and allied ships through the gap in the planetary shields. The landing force included troops from over 30 different species, each contributing their unique abilities to the ground assault. The battle for Vorthok Prime lasted 3 days. The Draknari defenders fought with the courage and skill that had made them the galaxy's dominant military force for millennia. However, they were facing an enemy that fought in ways they had never encountered before. The human-led coalition used tactics that combined the best elements of dozens of different military traditions. Fleet Admiral Corvin was captured during the final assault on the planetary command center. The Draknari leader had expected to die in battle rather than surrender, but Admiral Kim offered him terms that were designed to preserve his dignity while ending the war. The human commander understood that lasting peace would require the cooperation of all species, including the defeated Draknari. The surrender of Vorthok Prime marked the end of the old galactic order. The Draknari Empire that had controlled military affairs for 10,000 years was dissolved. The Xanthari scientific monopoly was broken as research facilities were open to all species. The Voidian commercial networks were restructured to provide equal access to all civilizations. The challenge now was to create a new form of galactic government that could maintain peace and stability without relying on domination and hierarchy. President Amanda Torres, who had been elected as the first human chancellor of the new galactic government, faced the enormous task of building a democratic alliance among species that had been enemies for thousands of years. The Galactic Federation that emerged from the war was based on principles that humanity had developed during their brief time as a client species. Each civilization would maintain their autonomy while contributing to the common good. Decisions would be made through democratic processes that respected the rights and interests of all species. Most importantly, the new government would be based on cooperation rather than competition. The transition was not easy. Many species struggled to adapt to the new system after millennia of rigid hierarchy. The Draknari in particular found it difficult to accept their reduced role in galactic affairs. However, the benefits of the new order gradually became apparent as trade increased, scientific research accelerated, and conflicts between species decreased. The first session of the Galactic Federation Council was held on New Geneva Station, humanity's first interstellar capital. Representatives from over 100 species gathered to establish the principles that would guide galactic civilization for the future. The debates were intense and sometimes heated, but they were conducted with a level of mutual respect that had been impossible under the old consortium system. Chancellor Torres addressed the assembled delegates with a speech that reflected on humanity's journey from silence to supremacy. She spoke about how humanity's greatest weakness, their lack of specialization, had become their greatest strength by allowing them to bridge the gaps between species that had been enemies for millennia. The new galactic government was structured to take advantage of each species' unique capabilities while ensuring that no single group could dominate the others. The Draknari were given responsibility for peacekeeping and defense, but under the oversight of a multi-species council. The Xanthari continued their scientific research but were required to share their discoveries with all civilizations. The Voidians managed interstellar commerce, but within a framework that prevented exploitation of weaker species. Humanity's role in the new order was that of mediators and facilitators. Their cognitive flexibility and diplomatic skills made them natural peacekeepers and negotiators. Human colonies became centers of cultural exchange where representatives from different species could meet and work together on common problems. The transformation of galactic civilization was completed within a generation. The rigid hierarchy that had dominated the galaxy for 50,000 years was replaced by a cooperative alliance that respected the autonomy and dignity of every species. Trade flourished as civilizations shared their unique products and innovations. Scientific research accelerated as species combined their different approaches to understanding the universe. The most significant change was in how conflicts between species were resolved. Under the old consortium system, disputes were settled through force or economic pressure applied by the dominant species. The new federation used mediation and negotiation to find solutions that benefited all parties. Humanity's diplomatic skills proved invaluable in this process, as they could understand and communicate with species that had very different ways of thinking. Earth itself was transformed into the cultural and diplomatic heart of the galaxy. The planet that had once been quarantined as too primitive for contact became a destination that representatives from every species wanted to visit. Human universities attracted students from across the galaxy who wanted to study the philosophy and methods that had created the new galactic order. The most popular courses were those that taught human approaches to problem-solving and conflict resolution. Species that had been locked into rigid thinking patterns for millennia found that human cognitive flexibility could help them develop new perspectives on old problems. The idea that weakness could become strength and that cooperation could achieve more than competition was revolutionary for many alien civilizations. Dr. Alan Reed, who had made the original discovery of the communication relay network, became the director of the Galactic Institute for Cultural Exchange. The institution was dedicated to helping different species understand and appreciate each other's unique perspectives. Reed often reflected on how the ancient artifact that had started humanity's journey had become the foundation for a new era of galactic cooperation. The economic benefits of the new system were dramatic. The open sharing of technology and resources led to unprecedented prosperity for all member species. Worlds that had been poor under the old hierarchy became wealthy as they gained access to markets and technologies that had previously been denied to them. The total economic output of the galaxy increased by over 500% within the first decade of Federation rule. Military conflicts became increasingly rare as species learned to resolve their differences through negotiation rather than warfare. The Federation peacekeeping forces, led by reformed Draknari officers, were called upon primarily for disaster relief and humanitarian missions. The massive fleets that had once enforced consortium rule were converted into exploration and research vessels. The exploration of the galaxy accelerated as species that had been prevented from expanding under the old system were free to establish new colonies. Human techniques for adapting to different environments proved invaluable as civilizations learned to settle worlds that had previously been considered uninhabitable. The galaxy's population doubled within 50 years as new worlds were open to colonization. Scientific discoveries that had been suppressed by the consortium hierarchy were finally revealed and developed. The consciousness transfer technology that humans had developed led to breakthroughs in medicine and psychology that extended lifespans and improved quality of life for all species. Quantum communication systems revolutionized how civilizations stayed connected across vast distances. Ambassador Kithara, who had been humanity's first contact with the consortium, became one of the most respected figures in the new Federation. She served as the Secretary General for Interspecies Relations and was instrumental in developing the diplomatic protocols that allowed such diverse civilizations to work together effectively. Her memoirs of the transition from Consortium to Federation became required reading for all diplomatic students. The children who grew up in the new galactic civilization could barely imagine how their worlds had been before the human revolution. On Federation worlds, species that had been enemies for thousands of years lived and worked together as neighbors and friends. Schools taught the histories and cultures of all member species, creating a generation that truly understood the value of diversity and cooperation. The greatest symbol of the new order was the galactic gardens on Earth, where representatives from every species had contributed plants and artworks from their homeworlds. Children from dozens of different civilizations played together in spaces that had been designed to accommodate beings with vastly different biologies and cultural needs. The common language that had evolved for interspecies communication was based on human linguistic principles but incorporated elements from every member civilization. Tom Anderson and Emma Walsh, who had started the Silent Uprising, became legends in their own lifetimes. Their story was taught in schools across the galaxy as an example of how innovation and determination could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. They continued their research into adaptive technologies, and their discoveries continued to benefit all species in the Federation. By the year 2250 years after the end of the Galactic War, humanity had achieved something that no species in galactic history had accomplished. They had not conquered the galaxy through military force or economic domination. Instead, they had transformed it through cooperation and mutual respect. The galaxy had become not an empire ruled by the strong, but a community where every species could contribute their unique gifts to the common good. Dr. Reed, now elderly but still active, delivered the final reflection on humanity's journey during the 50th anniversary celebration of the Federation. Speaking to an audience that included representatives from over 300 species, he said that humanity had been called the Silent Ones and deemed unworthy of the galactic conversation. But in their silence they had learned to listen. In listening they had learned to understand. In understanding they had learned to unite what had once been divided. The transformation was complete. Humanity had risen from silence to supremacy, but their supremacy was not based on power over others. It was based on the ability to bring out the best in every species and to create a civilization where diversity was celebrated rather than feared. The galaxy had learned that the most advanced species was not necessarily the most specialized, but the most adaptable and compassionate.